Hello students, in this session we will discuss about some enhanced data models for advanced applications from database management system. So far we were discussing about some of the basic database architectures, and we were specifically focusing on object-oriented database systems in the previous sessions. So now we will see some more enhanced or latest data models that are applied or that is part of the database application. So here in this session, initially we will be discussing about the active database concepts and triggers. So one of the major data model that is used with database system is the concept of triggers. So you might be familiar with the concept called as triggers. So we have given the heading like active database concepts and triggers. So triggers are actually used for creating a database which is always active. That means after the creation of database, whenever there are some updations or some changes happens to that particular database, we should have some additional operations that is to be executed along with that modification applied to the database table. For that particular purpose, we are using the concept called as triggers. So we'll be using the basic requirements or what are triggers and how it is being implemented in traditional database system, and what are the different syntaxes used for the creation of triggers and how it can be implemented by using SQL language. So we will discuss about the generalized model for active databases. Along with that, we will discuss, for that particular purpose, we will be discussing about the triggers used in Oracle DBMS system. So what is actually a trigger, or triggers are executed? So these are actually some set of statements that are executed when a specified condition occurs during some of the database operations like insert, delete or update. So some statements or some operations will be executed because of some occurrences of events with that particular database table. So normally what we are doing is we are creating a table, we are creating the structure of a table, then we are adding data into the table. So we will be doing some insertion. Sometimes we will be adding rows, sometimes we will be updating the value that is already present in the database table, or sometimes we will be removing some row, or we will be deleting some rows that is already present in that particular table. For example, if you are having a reservation table for a train ticket, what is happening is whenever a new reservation happens, all the details are added into the database table. That means some rows are being created. Similarly, when the number of seats available becomes 0 or less than 0, automatically something must be happen, that is no more seats are available. Some for a simplest example is it must provide a message like no more seats are available, or the reservation must be given for a waiting list category. So that must be happen automatically when some events like insert, delete or update operation happens with that particular database table. So triggers, so that is why it is called as an active database. So whenever some triggers are created with some particular tables, those tables will be always active because there will be some changes, there will be some other set of statements, some operations that will be executed automatically whenever the specified events like insert, delete or update operation happens, and that too based on some conditions only. So whenever some insert happens, according to some condition, this trigger will be executed. Whenever some delete happens according to some condition, that particular trigger statements will be executed. Similarly, whenever some update happens, the trigger based on the given condition, the trigger statements will be executed. So once again, the exact definition for triggers is triggers are actually the action that fire automatically based on the above given conditions along with the insert, delete or update operation. So triggers are the actions that fire automatically, that will be executed automatically based on certain conditions. So we will see some more description on the usages of triggers. So the primary point is, whenever we use some triggers within some database tables, that database will become active because some of the operations will be executed automatically based on the conditions and events associated with that particular database table. Now, every trigger concept uses a model which is called as an event, condition and action model, because every trigger will be consisting of some event. That means the trigger will be fired based on the execution of a particular event. And second thing is, after that event or during the occurrence of that event, if some condition occurs, then only the trigger statements will be executed. That is the second point. And the third point is the set of statements that is to be executed if the event along with that particular condition occurs. What are the statements to be executed? That is part of action. So that is why the implementation of trigger within a database table is usually called as event, condition, action model, or simply we can call it as ECA model. So what are these events, condition and action? We will see. So trigger follow an event, condition, action ECA model. So what is an event? Event can be any database modification. That means the modification on database can be done by using any of the three database operations like insert, delete and update. So insert will add some rows into the table, that is a modification. Delete will remove some row from the database table, that is another modification. And update is a statement or an event that will update some existing row from a database table. So these are the modification events. So all the modification events, insert and delete and update, all these three operations are usually called as the events associated with the trigger operations. Now the second point is the condition. The condition can be any true or false expression. So maybe some attribute value which is having some condition. Some condition means, like for example, if the age is less than 10, that is a condition. If the age is less than 10 means it will produce, it is a condition, it will produce either true or false. So based on the condition, it will be having some either true or false result. Accordingly, if it is true, that will be executed, or if it is false, so if the condition requires a false thing, accordingly the trigger will be executed. So normally a condition will be having either true or false answer. According to the condition expression, the following statements, that is part of triggers, will be executed. Now this condition part is normally optional, we can avoid that. If we are not providing any condition, it will always be true. That means it will execute the following statements without checking for a particular condition. So if there is a condition given, the condition will be executed based on the result of that condition, either true or false. The following trigger statements will be executed. But if you are not providing any condition, it will always give true and the following statements will be executed. Now the third part of ECA model is the action. That is the sequence of SQL statements that will be automatically executed. That means a trigger action or the set of statements to be executed. Maybe we can have a single statement that is part of a trigger, or we can have multiple number of statements. What are it is the set of statements? So what are the operations that is to be executed part of this trigger, I mean the event condition satisfaction? That is actually called as the action part of ECA model. So any trigger, any database table that is having some triggers will follow the event condition action model. Events are insert, delete and update. Condition, any true or false expression. And action, the set of SQL statements that will be automatically executed according to the triggering condition. Now we will see one example for trigger. So we will take the employee table. Normally when a new employee is added to a department, so assume that we are having a department table. We are having a department table. We are having a department table. Department table. So when a new employee is added, so normally you can call like the department will be having all the details of departments. So when a new employee is added to a department, modify the total salary of the department to include the new employee's salary. So assume that a department, for example CS department, is having 25 faculty members. So we are having one employee table also. Assume that we are having some employee table also. This is employee table. So employee table consists of some 25 employees along with their salary also. So each employee will be having his salary. So whenever a new employee is being added, that means a 26th row is being added to this employee table, there must be some execution of a trigger. That means the content of department consists of a total salary field. A total salary field. What is that total salary? It will indicate, so each department, for example here we are having CS. CS will be having some total salary, for example 50,000, for example 50,000, or 5 lakh. For example, CS department is having a total salary of 5 lakh based on these 25 employees. So whenever a new employee is being added, so some modifications applied to the employee table. Now what will happen to the department table? Automatically it should update the total salary of that particular department, because CS, for example, a newly added employee is having some 50,000 or 50,000 salary, for example. Now the total salary must be added, that is 5 lakh plus 50,000 must be added. That updation must be happen automatically on the occurrence of the event, that is the insertion of a new employee into the employee table. Okay, so very simple thing. We are having two tables, employee and department. Employee table consists of the details of all the employees. Then the department table consists of the description of various departments. Now the department consists of the total salary field, where each department total salary is being placed. Now whenever a new employee is added to one particular department, that department total salary field must be updated based on the salary of the newly added employee. So we are not going to update separately for this total salary. According to the occurrence of this particular event, that is insertion of a new employee into the employee table, in the same time automatically the department table total salary field must be updated. This will be possible only when we are adding a trigger into the employee table, because we are applying an event to the employee table. Some automatic execution must be done because of that modification on employee table. So this is the situation. We can say several situations. For example, if the account balance becomes less than some particular amount, we cannot withdraw the amount. That must be automatically possible with any bank transaction. If the mark goes to some less than value, automatically the status of that student, that must be given as a failure. That is also that must also happen automatically within the specified database table. So all these are examples of triggering action. So we are having triggering events like insertion happens, then we'll be having we can have some condition also. We can avoid condition, we can have some condition. Now for this particular situation we will see some condition, we'll add some condition, but it is not a strict thing. For this particular case we don't actually require a particular condition, but still we will have a condition. And finally we are having some statements. That means update the department table with total salary is equal to current total salary plus the salary of the newly added employee. Okay, so event, condition, action. So we will see this example. So this is the situation that we are going to solve. So the meaning of this particular situation is we will create a trigger and we will call that trigger as total salary 1. We can give any name for a trigger, like the name given for a table. We can give any name for a table. Similarly, we can give any name for a trigger. So normally the trigger name must be unique. If we provide one name for a trigger, we cannot give the same trigger name for a second trigger. So trigger name must be unique. So here, when this trigger will be executed, this trigger will be executed after the insert operation on the employee table. Okay, so after a new employee is being added to the employee table, this department table must be updated. So it will be executed after an insert on the table employee. Then second thing is, if we are inserting more than one employee, that means we'll be creating more than one rows, and for each of these rows that is being added to the employee table, the same updation must be happen on the department table. So we are adding one more thing, that is called as it must be executed for each row. For each row that is affected by the insertion operation. So now the event we are going to consider here is the insert. So if an insert creates more than one row, it will, or the trigger statements will be applied for each of the row that is affected by the triggering event, and it will do the following operations for each row. So for each row is a must for this particular situation. Now for each row we are going to check a condition when new dot department number is not null. So look at this new. New is a special keyword associated with the attribute of the department table. That is, when new dot department number is not null. Sorry, this new dot department number, we are going to apply the trigger on employee table. So employee table will be having the corresponding department. So each employee will be having their department number, DNO will be there with this employee table. So one employee, for example the employee H will be having department number 2. Okay, so for that particular department number we should have the total salary updation. Okay, so here we are not depending on department name, we are considering department number. So when the newly added employee is assigned to one particular department, so he should have a department number there. That is why when new dot department number is not null, that means it should have some value. The department number attribute must have some value. That is why department number is not null. Now what is this new? New is the keyword that is associated with the attribute for condition. So what is the meaning of this new? New indicates after the execution of the event or the value that is being produced after the execution of the triggering event is usually represented by a special keyword new dot department number. Now along with that I will mention another term, that is we are having one more keyword that is called as old. Old indicates it will provide the value before applying the event. For example, if we update the value of mark, the mark was 5, then one event occurs, mark changed to 10. Now this is old dot mark and this is new dot mark. This is before the event, this is after the event. This is the way how we are getting the value of before the occurrence of event and after the occurrence of event. So new dot d number, it is given directly here. Now normally in Oracle it is following in syntax like colon new. In Oracle we are mentioning it as colon new. It is not given like that in this particular example. It is simply mentioning new dot department number, which represents the new value, that is new department number that is added to the newly inserted row of employee table. It must not be null. That is a condition we are giving for this particular trigger example. The trigger will then, after that, if the condition is true, the trigger will update the department by setting the new total salary to be the sum of old total salary and new salary. Old total salary means it is not that old, it is the total salary that is already there in the department table for that particular department. But new dot salary is the salary that is added into the row that is currently being inserted. The new salary that is being added to the employee table. So in the department table, for example CS department or CS department, assume that the number is 1. For that department number 1, it will take the existing total salary plus it will add the new salary that is added to employee table from the variable new dot salary. And we should have a condition for that. It will be updating. For any updation we should have a condition, otherwise it will update all the rows. What is the condition? Where department is equal to the newly added employee department, that is new dot department number. I hope it is clear. Once again, in this particular case it will create a trigger and we are giving the name as total salary 1, and it will be executed after an insert on employee table, and for each of the row that is being inserted it will check for a condition. If the new department number is not null, it will update the department table by adding the total salary that is already there in the department table plus the newly added salary of employee, with the condition the department number equals to new dot department number. We will see a pictorial representation of the same trigger statement along with the syntax. So the syntax of trigger, or the definition of trigger, will be given like create. The syntax of trigger will be like create trigger trigger name. So this is a user defined name. Then create trigger name. Now look at this area, create, it can be an alter also. If you are having one trigger already existing, we can alter that by changing this with alter trigger. Then it will alter an existing trigger. But now we are going to create a trigger, so we are using create trigger name. After insert. Okay, so it can be before, after, or instead of. So with any event like insert, delete, or update, we can have three keywords. One is after, one is before, and instead of. We can use any of these three. So we will discuss on that later, but this particular case we are going to use after. That means after the occurrence of the event. That is why after insert. So after a row is being inserted into the table, the action must be executed. So after, that means the event must be happened. Okay, so after insert, then on employee. So insert is the event here, but we can have insert, update, or delete. After insert, on employee, that is the table. So we are going to apply trigger on the occurrence of an event on the table employee. So after insert, on is a keyword. So all these green part are keywords. Create trigger name. After insert, on employee, for each row. So for each row is required for those type of triggers, that actions to be executed for each of the row that is being affected by the event. That means after insert. So if it is inserting more than one row, the following action must be executed separately for each of the row that is affected by the triggering event. So this is actually for each row. So we can have a second type also that we will discuss later. So in this particular case, it is a row level trigger for each row. Then we are providing a condition when new dot department number is not null. That means the newly inserted row on employee and its department number is not null. Not null means it is having a department name. The employee is assigned a department number. If it is null means he is not assigned. If it is null means he is not being assigned a department. If it is not null means it is having a department value. He is assigned to some particular department. Then what we are going to do? Update department. So I am going to update the second table department. Set total salary is equal to total salary plus new dot salary. That means new salary means into the employee we are inserting a row. That salary will be added with the existing total salary of the department table. Then we are providing the condition like where department number is equal to new dot department number. That means for this department table, if that department matches with the newly added department number on the table employee. So this part is called as action. This is the condition. So this picture is very clear about the definition of a trigger. So create trigger name before or after or instead of event on table name for each row. Then condition when, condition the set of statements that is to be executed or the action that is to be executed after the execution of event and based on the condition provided that is part of that particular event. Okay, so I think this syntax is clear with this particular pictorial representation. this is given in the form of an example, but from the same example you can take the syntax of trigger also. Now create or alter trigger. So the variations of trigger usage, we can create a trigger by using create trigger statement. It will create a new trigger. Now alter trigger, the syntax will be like alter trigger, trigger name. It will alter a trigger if one exists. It is very clear. If you want to change some contents of that particular trigger, trigger name, we can do this alteration of trigger. Now we can have a third form, that is create or alter trigger, trigger name. It will create a new trigger if one does not exist, and if one exists it will alter that particular trigger. So we can use the combination of both create and alter by using create or alter trigger, trigger name. So it will work. That means create or alter trigger will works for the both cases where a trigger exists or not. Now we will discuss about the conditions along with the event. So these are the event conditions. Along with the event we are using some condition, that is after event, before event, instead of event. So we have mentioned about after event. So what is happening with after event or after trigger means, after triggering event means it will execute the actions after the execution of that particular event. So in the previous case, after the insertion of one employee row into the employee table, the following action will be executed after the occurrence of that particular event. Now before means it will execute before the occurrence of event. That means before insert. For example, before insert means, so this is the table to which we are trying to insert, and I am going to write the insert statement. Now after writing the enter insert statement, I will press on enter. That particular situation, before moving that row into this particular table, it will execute the action part of that trigger. Previous case, it will insert first, then execute the action. But this case, before means before insertion, it will execute the condition, or it will go for checking the condition, and according to the condition that action will be executed. So before, the condition will be verified, according to the condition the statements will be executed. So one example, like if I want to update a particular table, or if I want to insert something into a table, and before insertion I need to go for a check. If the age is greater than 50, I don't wish to insert, so I am writing insert statement. Now before insertion itself, the trigger condition will be evaluated. If the condition is true or based on true or false, we can decide whether it is to be inserted or it can be avoided. So we can actually block the insertion. That we are not going into that detail in this particular subject. There we are using some special error statements like raise application error, a stored procedure, raise application error for blocking the execution of an event as part of trigger statement. So if you want to abort the occurrence of that particular event, or if you want to avoid the occurrence of a particular event according to the condition, we can use before the execution of an event. Now the third point is instead of. It executes instead of the event, even without having the event. In any situation, that following action will be executed. That means we are actually not looking for the execution of that particular event. Means instead of insert means the trigger will not go for checking the execution of that particular event. It will check the condition, and accordingly it will execute the action part of the trigger statement. So it is usually used with modifying the views that are created virtually from any database table. We are not commonly using instead of, but this is also possible. Most of the time we are using after the event, before the event. So instead of is also a provision where we are not looking into the occurrence of event. Without looking into the event, the triggering statement will be executed. Now we are having two categories of triggers. One is row level trigger and second one is statement level trigger. So in the previous example we were using row level trigger, where it depends on the number of rows, or the action will be applied to all the rows that are affected by the event. So we will see what is the difference between these two. So a row level trigger means, if you are using row level trigger, we are using a for each row statement. For each row, that means for all the rows that are affected by that particular event, the action will be applied for all the rows. So if that event affects 4 rows, for each row the action will be applied separately. That is row level trigger. Now we are having a second type of trigger, that is called as statement level trigger, which is the default one. If you are not using any like for each row, by default it will take it as statement level trigger. What is happening is, it will execute the action part for the SQL statement only once. It is not looking for the row. For example, one event occurs, I am not using for each row. That means it is affected by 4 rows, but for all these 4 rows are being affected. For these entire rows, the action will be executed only once. It will be executed only once. But this case, row level trigger, the action will be executed for each of the row that are affected by the occurrence of event. So statement level trigger can be differentiated by not providing for each row statement along with the trigger creation. So once again, row level triggers are executed separately for each row that are affected, and statement level triggers will execute only once for the entire SQL statement. Now the conditions. So it can be any true or false condition, like in the previous example, when department number is not null. That means it is either true or false. So the condition can be any true or false condition to control whether a trigger is activated or not. Now if the condition is absent, that means that the trigger will always execute for that particular event. If there is no condition being provided, it will consider it as true and the action will be executed always. Otherwise, the condition is evaluated before the event for the before trigger case, and after the event, that is for after trigger. So we are, as we have mentioned before, we are having before trigger and after trigger. And if you are not having any condition, it will directly execute the action before the trigger or after the trigger, depends on the trigger statement. So we should have a condition with a true or false result. That means the statement must be in that format, and it is an optional part. If you are not providing any condition, it will be taking the action directly depending on before or after trigger mentioned. Now what is the content of action? Now an action can be a single SQL statement or a sequence of SQL statements. Normally they are enclosed between begin and end. So if the trigger is written in the PLSQL format, you might be familiar that where the set of statements, if you are having more than one statements available, it must be enclosed between begin and end, capital begin and small capital end. So some set of statements that are enclosed between. If we are having only one SQL statement, we don't actually require a begin and end. In the previous example, we had only one SQL statement, that is why we are not using begin and end. Now normally the action consists of the relevant modifications. So if that particular event occurs and the condition also satisfies, what are the modifications, what are the actions, what is to be done on that particular situation, that is already mentioned inside the trigger. That modification will be executed as part of the action statements written inside the trigger syntax. So we are having trigger, creation of trigger, we can have create or alter trigger, trigger name, then we are having before after instead of, triggering condition for each row level, statement level, then condition, true or false condition expression, then we are having the action, single SQL statement or multiple number of SQL statements. Now we will see in detail about the design and implementation issues for the creation of active databases that consist of triggers. So active databases are created by using trigger concept. So there are some issues when we are dealing with these active databases. So we will see into these implementation issues. An active database allows users to make the following changes to triggers. So when we create a trigger, we have already created a trigger. For example, trigger T1 is already being created. It must be a unique trigger name. Next time we cannot use the same trigger name. If we are using the same trigger name, it will be overwriting the previous one, so that will create some problem. So assume that we are having a trigger T1 being created. We can do activation of that trigger. We can activate that trigger T1. Only when it is being activated, that trigger will be executed. Then we can deactivate. That means deactivate means we are having a trigger T1, and if we deactivate that, the trigger will not be executed. So we can activate and deactivate. It may happen between. So for some days we can deactivate a particular trigger if some condition of if that modification is not at all required. Now the third point is we can actually drop a trigger that is already being created by using a drop trigger name syntax. That is also one of the major part of major changes that are possible with the trigger usage. Now when we add an event to the trigger, we can have an event that can be considered in three ways. How we can consider a particular event that is part of an active database or a trigger concept. It is like, that means when that event can be executed, we can have an immediate consideration, we can have a deferred consideration, or we can have a detached consideration. So this is about the execution of the event that is part of a trigger. So it can be an immediate consideration. So just look into the statement immediate consideration. Immediate consideration, very simply if I say, it can very immediately consider the execution of the event. Then deferred consideration, it can be considered for execution in a deferred manner. That means the event may be delayed. Detached means the event can be considered as a separate transaction. So you will see that separately. So immediate consideration means part of the same transaction. So the event will be part of the same transaction and can be one of the following depending on the situation. So before or after or instead of. So we are having a transaction, entire transaction that consists of this trigger also. So whenever that event happens, suddenly quickly it will execute that particular triggering statement. It will not wait for any other things. It will directly execute. Just if it is just before it will execute, immediately it will be considered it is part of the same transaction itself. Just after the occurrence of event, that will be executed. Then instead of event also the trigger will be executed. Now the second point is deferred consideration. That means the condition is evaluated at the end of the transaction. Now the event will be considered only at the end of the entire transaction. So for this entire transaction, so example, this is a transaction T1. It consists of a number of statements. In between some place that event will be occurring. So it is having a number of statements available. So event may be occurred, but this will be evaluated, or condition will be evaluated only at the end of that particular transaction. So in the first case, whenever that event occurs, whenever that condition satisfies, the event will be executed, and the transaction or the event, the trigger action will be executed. But deferred consideration, the condition may occur in between, the event may occur in between, but it will be evaluated only at the end of that particular transaction. So here it is T1. Immediately in between it can happen, but here only at the end of that particular transaction, that time only the condition will be evaluated, and accordingly the event action will be executed. Now detached means the condition is evaluated in a separate transaction. So again the same transaction, that event condition will be given here, but this condition, that portion will be executed, that is part of a separate transaction called as T2, for example. Previous case everything will be part of the same transaction itself, but here this evaluation and that action part is separated to a separate transaction. So that is why it is called as detached consideration. So immediate consideration, deferred consideration, and detached consideration for the occurrence of the event execution. Then we will see some of the applications for active databases like triggers, just for providing some notification. For example, I have already mentioned about reservation. If the number of seats are not available, some notification. If bank account goes less than some particular balance, then some notification may be given. Similarly, this is one of the application of usage of active databases, some automatic notification when certain condition occurs. Similarly, the notification when some integrity constraint, enforcing integrity constraints. For example, some value must be between or greater some particular value. So triggers are smarter and more powerful than the usages of normal constraints in database tables like primary key. All these are constraints, check constraint, etc. All these are constraints. But if you use a trigger, by using that trigger according to some occurrence of some value, some condition that can be implemented, or the integrity constraints can be enforced more perfectly by using the trigger concept. Then another thing is maintenance of derived data. Maintenance of derived data. That means it will automatically update derived data and avoid anomalies due to redundancy. Now, maintenance of derived data. So in the previous example, we were updating the total salary of each department. This total salary is actually derived from the salary field of employee table. So one updation or one change that is applied to one table will reflect by changing some portion of some other table that is being derived from the first table. So do the modification on one table, it may reflect on a secondary table that is being derived by the first table. So derived data can be managed properly by using the concept of active databases. Now, when we consider the triggers in SQL 99, so in the previous session we discussed about object relational database system like SQL 3 and SQL 99. So when we consider SQL 90, so which is an advanced version of SQL, it is using a new concept that is called as a referencing statement also. We are using a referencing clause that is for providing a different name, alias name for the rows or table. We can provide an alias name for a row, or we can provide an alias name for the entire table. We are using referencing. Earlier we are not using that referencing term, but nowadays latest SQL 99 etc. they are using the referencing clause. So we will see two example triggers, general example, where we will be using the same table, the employee and department. So we will see two trigger examples, some variations. So first one is a row level trigger that uses for each row, and second one is a statement level trigger which uses a different format. So first one, create trigger name after update of salary on employee. So look at this statement. In the previous example we used only after update on employee. Now this is also possible. We can specifically select the attribute also, after update of salary, that means after update of attribute on the table employee. That is also possible. Now look at this statement. So we are going to mention about referencing concept, like, so along with that I am writing referencing old row as O. That means I am going to provide an alias name for the old row before the occurrence of the update event, which is given a name O, comma, new row as N. After the occurrence of event we are having that row, and that row is given an alias name that is called as N. So later we can use either O or N for referring the previous old row or new row. That is the enhancement added to SQL 99. Then as usual for each row, when n.dno is not null. n.dno means new row DNO is not null. Update department, set total salary is equal to total salary plus new salary minus old salary. So here in the previous example we are using after insert, a new row is being inserted, so new employee is being added, so we simply need to add that new salary. But now we are using an update on existing salary, so total salary will be added with new salary, but now we need to avoid the previous salary of the same employee, so minus old salary, where department number is equal to n dot department number, that is for the newly, that means updated employee row. A slight variation of the same trigger, where we are applying the event update, then we are using referencing and alias variable names for the old row and new row of the updated table. Now we can see another example. So this is for a row level trigger. Now we will see one statement level trigger. Create trigger name. We are giving total salary 2 after update of salary on employee, referencing old table as O. So here we are providing the name for the old table before updation, after updation. So before updation, here we are selecting the table, entire table is given an alias name O, old one, N for the new table for each statement. So this is a statement level trigger. Then we are providing the condition. The same condition is modified here in a different format. When exists, so this is an SQL query, select star from N from the new table where new department number is not null. So from the new table, after the updation, the new table, we are selecting all the values where new dot department number is not null. There exists, when exists, if this exists, that means the department number exists or not. Or we are checking exists, select star from O, that is from old, where old department number is not null. If no updation happens, we need to check that department number in the old table. If some updation happens, we need to check whether that department number is available with the new table. So when exists, this it will provide yes or no, or true or false, or this will also provide yes or no, true or false. If either this or this, update department, the same thing, update department. Now here for the entire department I am giving another alias name, that is D for the department. Set department total salary is equal to department total salary plus select sum of new salary from N. So here it is not the thing is, for the entire statement, for that particular update we are applying the trigger only once, because it is a statement level trigger. So for applying the same into all the rows that is being affected, that is why we are using sum of new salary from N, where D department number equal to new department number minus select, this is for getting the old salary, so this is getting the new salary and this is for getting the old salary. Select sum of old salary from old table, where department number is equal to old department number, where department number in select department number from N new union select department number from old. So that means which is common, which is equivalent to this one, where department number is equal to new department number. So only because of the statement, so we can see that writing row level trigger is simpler when compared to a statement level trigger, because row level trigger, if you write the statements after this condition, it will be affected on all the rows. This will be applied to all the rows, but statement level it will be executed only once. So that is why we need to take care of all the rows affected. That is why it is written in a different way. So that is why we are using a referencing clause for referring the old table, new table. Then by using that O and N, we can refer to the different attribute values of old and new separately. Then we can take the total salary, we can find out the total salary, we can update the total salary based on the condition, based on the department number of the old and new table that is being affected by the updation of employee. So this is another example. Similarly, several examples are available in Elmastery textbook. So that is all about the trigger concept. So we were discussing about an active database system where we use the trigger database triggers, which are used for the for applying some rules that is to be strictly or automatically followed as part of a database table without having any human interaction. Some statements will be executed automatically. That is why that is how the database is made active. So this is the first data model that we were focusing on this particular module. In the next session we will discuss about some more enhanced data models that are used with database system. Thank you.